My friends and family, I'm afraid very few in this movement have had the brutal honesty and gumption to face the fact that the ARCHONS are masters of organization. I had a dream last night. For some reason I was busking with the fiddle, the song. 'Cause it's a bittersweet symphony, this life. You're born and you chase the money, then you die. Inmates run the schools. Psychopaths run the universities. And the scum are always at the top of the world in this hijacked form it's in. Since these evil ones gave us their minds, now they're giving us their style, a style of death only. Why do benevolent souls even still exist here at all? Seems like they're weeding most of them out. Well, we are the true creator's energy, rendered matrix batteries unless we are really awakened and do something else. Why is there still endless war? Why are the costs of so-called living rapidly rising almost everywhere? Inexorably. No one can exorcise these parasites, it seems like, on a grand scale. What are those data centers? Really? What are they really? Why do they use so much water? Why do I want my hair to look a little bit like fucking DJT today? 'Cause I need to be silly. Silliness has been lacking. Do they really need to use all the water they say they use in those data centers just to store all of our data and YouTube videos, for example? Or is it true what some speculate, that they're really underground Draco developments, the return of the reptilians, the physical second coming of the false self-gods? Why do we seem to have any free will at all if it doesn't really exist? Well, as my friend JSJ says, we all have to consume cholesterol or other animals to have these bodies. In my humble opinion, we have to be brutally honest also around what we are up against. The adversary are master organizers. Look at the rise of cluster B personality disorders everywhere in the Western realm. You think that's a coincidence? If most knew how horrifically they are siphoned and energetically drained daily, if we could see these parasites feeding on our suffering in what the Tibetans call the second bardo daily, we probably wouldn't work slave jobs just for the rent, just to make holes in our subconscious. Pay the rents and mortgages, the gauge of the mortal value of our existence here in dollars and hours and years. And we would revolt en masse, or self-exit in a group, like perhaps the Mayans did. But by convincing us, convincing us of our separation. That we all have to put food on the table and keep a roof over our head, and death and taxes are irremovable. Convincing us also through forcing financial slavery and distracting us with dopamine hitting gadget addiction and all the other terrible addictions that are rising. Doom scrolling, horror movies, porn, more and more threats of totalitarian takeovers, fear porn, get real scared and be dominated by your fear so much that you become immobilized. Weather weapons, and more locally, cluster B epidemics here in the West. From the beginning to the end, the devout followers of Abrahamic religions, and now the scientism death cult, the fake news, the fake presidents, and the action of killing the real benevolent ones, like the 4 presidents in Africa who wouldn't go along with the insane mandates and plans 5 and 6 years ago. And then kicking Thomas Massey out of Congress here in the U.S. Or paying me to die of a deadly blood disease and schizophrenia, but blocking my growth as a truth teacher. Or, unless I put it in the 6-sided form of a book, making sure it won't become a professional thing. And, of course, I don't want to have fucking advertisements on this, even if I have the numbers. Through running, or infiltrating all of the major religions, governments, lands, and jacking up the cost everywhere, rendering us like the frogs in the pot proverbial analogy, turning up the heat on that pot rapidly this year, more next year. Firing, shooting, hanging, bribing, minimizing, or excluding the real truth tellers. Assassinating the popular public ones. Since 2020, masterfully and consistently through all of these tactics, convincing the pneumatic or real souls in our life, in our existences in this version, they are on the Truman Show. Through many isolation tactics. Through escalating financial slavery and fear, keeping those few with true Christ or soul and real spirit essences intact, more and more seemingly alone, or feeling only able to converge or meet online in a digital sandbox that's, of course, orchestrated, overseen, and controlled by the ARCHONS themselves. Their fake-ass stolen rulership seems believable. Most of us fucking believe it. Folks, as good and real as Joshua can really think and spread the idea that everything in this realm is only a hell, a loose farm simulation, that sex is only bad, and the Mandela effect is real. Yeah. because of their massive, systematic mastery for over a century in compulsory Goy worker training, or for example, or what we call public 1 through 12 for school systems. Imagine if there were two main qualifiers to become children's teachers in that. You have to be very unquestioning enough to force the archonic ideas, and of course you have to know whatever you're teaching, and you have to be a psychic prisoner of hell. I thought of this part of the video as I was riding to Somerville to buy milk the other day. To think as a trapped psychic inmate, a resident, Heilig or Normie, resident of the Hell Realm Loose Farm, in that big sterile gray, big buildings with what Tiffany called the insanity lights, the blinking fluorescent lights that she said made her feel crazy, forced into that child's prison 8 hours a day. This explains why so many of them, public school teachers, are sadistic, apathetic, boring, and compliant, and almost never benevolent. I had a few. My gate teacher, Miss Mixon, would smoke cigarettes in class, took us to an Atlanta Braves game on her, or it. Nothing funny happened, as I recall. It was second grade, and she would smoke cigarettes in class, but I remember how shocking it was that she encouraged probably discernment or free thinking. On The Simpsons, the longest running cartoon show ever with the best writing, some of the best writing in television, James L. Brooks and Sam Simon, had a character on there once who was, interestingly enough, since Groening is a Freemason, was a Jewish substitute teacher who wore a cowboy hat, who was encouraging thinking, and Lisa fell in love with him and was really sad and crying when he left and the normal teacher came back. But it was an interesting episode, and how rare that is in this system of forced Goy training. And as I said before, and Mark Passio was the first one I knew to point it out, and over a century ago, when they designed these systems, the trivium was taken out. Or logic, grammar, and rhetoric. Discernment and ether removed from the curriculum. And bridging true goodness into capitalism was not encouraged. Did anyone doing this at farmers markets think of the idea for how they make a living in school? Public Indoctrination Academy. Independence had to be poo-pooed unless you're a cog in the beast. You were told you needed a degree from a university, ideally an Ivy League school where they do stuff like skull and bones rituals to be wealthy in the society. Psychopaths were hired in masse at the colleges in vast swaths to cull the positive and benevolent, and encourage hive-minded inversions. Groupthink, mind flunk, sexual inversion, and all kinds of perversion. Greed is pure goodness and archontic. Inversional indoctrination. There's a book called The Great Mistake, all about how it was gradually brought in. How they attempted to turn the university systems, particularly in California, but everywhere, into places to do cheap research. And they could bring in what, say, BG wanted the student body to believe in when he donated a lot of money to that particular university. So yeah, I don't know how whether it was there from the get, or was this book, Christopher Hitchens' book, accurate? And archontic, inversional indoctrination, grandiosity, separatism, social Darwinism, and elitism, the longer one stays in there. I mean, one of the first stories in John Lamb Lash's book, Not in His Image, was about how the head of the Library of Alexandria's name was Hypatia, a woman, a brilliant woman who encouraged discernment. And they beheaded her in a horrific act to let people know what happens to headmasters who encourage discernment all the way those thousands of years ago. But nowadays, the longer one stays in there in university, lawyers, doctors, shrinks, judges, all be live. They are superior to you, and they get indoctrinated in believing they have the right to rule over you, decide your fate, make you sick or well, free or imprisoned, depending on whether or not they like you often, choose how much you're going to have to pay for whatever services they render. They better deserve to rule over us and get wealthy while locking us up and often making us sicker. The narcissist personality disorders rampant amongst them, and CEOs, of course, and nobody is ever allowed true freedom of thought, at least in public, at least if they're popular, let alone existing out of the black cube's insistence in financial slavery, in rent or holes in your subconscious, property taxes, crazy utilities bills, and mortgages. If somebody invents or discovers an organic cure for the big C, for example, or a free energy creating device, here in the U.S., they get to knock on the door from the MIB or jail if they don't cease and desist, healing people organically of that biggest money maker that the big pharma has. You know, J. Edward Griffin made a documentary that's been scrubbed from YouTube about 10 years ago. You might find it on an alternative platform, about how about a half dozen or so occasions in the last century in this country alone, people either figured out or heard of the ancient ways to heal it and sold it, and they all got the equivalent of $1 million fine, and all of them did about a month in jail. And most of them moved to Mexico City, if you're interested in learning in that, where they still thrive to this day in a country that doesn't criminalize organic health cures like that. And if they actually created a free energy device, they get a cease and desist edict. If they invent free energy machines and are dumb enough to notify the patent office, they're told, you are a threat to national security. Because our illusionary nation, according to them, the false rulers, is cannon fodder for Israel's wars, for example, and an extraction system and mind control, several 1,000-mile wide encampment and financial slavery hub for the Hell Realm. The cost has been jacked up everywhere, not just in the U.S., but most all communities in the USA, or what was once the USA, were infiltrated by these devils. Or shut down from the beginning. The real schizophrenia is in our national country identity. Because we have the Constitution. And we're also, as far as I can discern, the most brainwashed, terrified goy in the whole realm. Well, which is it, America? Which is it, U.S. corporation? Do we have inalienable, inarchontic rights to freedom of thought, freedom of truth, freedom of action, free will? Or are we a loose factory farm slave animal prison? Which is it, folks? Citizens, friends and family and foes, which is it? That's why this land, the land I'm standing on, beautiful South Carolina, the digital realm I'm in, YouTube, online, Facebook, Instagram, X, Rumble, are the psychological war battlefield. And the ARCHONS are the owners of this battlefield. The owners of the ball teams, the CEOs, and the umpires. If you get out of line, but don't actually break the community guidelines, for example, thus, then it becomes what Muskie said. It's freedom of speech, not freedom of reach. Your loss of the audience or numbers. Because Kronos is the God who eats his own children, is the master of numbers. The Anu are master mathematicians. Who of us even remember what algebra is, let alone use it in daily life, let alone trigonometry or advanced physics and calculus, or what the Fibonacci spiral is and how it compares to the true spiral of the flower of life? I mean, they're fucking advanced mathematical wizards. Face it. The Archon, the Parasite Junior Gouge, and Kronos is the master of numbers in this realm in its stolen form. But many have worked really hard to build, many idiots in flesh suits have worked really hard to build the Matrix in the Truman Show facade. Many have labored tremendously in obedience to the false self-parasites in the second bardo, the ARCHONS, to convince the vast fucking majority of the pneumatic souls that you're all alone, because everyone they meet just about is a fucking NPC. Making the facade seem real, especially since 2020, to terrify us out of sovereignty and community and make it seem completely true that there is no free will and only scum can rule here through what was probably a million years of literally bloody Stockholm Syndrome and a century of the mainstream media shoved down every unquestioning person's subconscious mind and throat. Most do as they're told and go along to get along in hell. They got their beer, TV, and sports. They don't care about the truth, as Jordan Maxwell said. People still go to the church, pay the government to do what the government does, and go back and take their boosters, and walk off the cliff in a long line of idiots like Hollywood lemmings in a row. I remember seeing people about 5 years ago lined up to these impromptu booster stations. Lined up to get the experiment with no fact sheets. Line up to obey the emperor whose clothes are only lies. From the Newt World Order's New Cage movement to the controlled opposition's ways of making certain that dissenters fall in line like the big red and black pillar communities encouraging keeping your financial slavery going and talking about self-exit as the only solution. You know, many of you know the CIA has done a fucking great job in either organizing or controlling the rebellions. Now we have the rise of the Gen Z not interested in ever even pursuing the opposite gender, but for rational reasons, antinatalism does a great job at making certain the discerning minds in Gen Z will never have healthy, especially, or even non-reproductive sexual and community relations. I think this is one of the reasons why this is promoted by the algorithm and the imposter powers. It'd be one thing if they were only, if it was just about, not reproducing. But this, with the incels and all that, and the screaming angry people, it does a great job of preventing any community or any group awakening. Because what are we missing out on without the Taoist yin yang? Without having healthy heterosexual, non-reproductive heterosexual sex lives or hierogamic sacred sexual union, partnership? What are we missing out on? I mean, the Taoist had a saying, a healthy partner makes a healthy marriage makes a healthy home, a healthy home makes a healthy neighborhood makes a healthy town, etc., yada yada. So, yet, the Archons concocted or took over and shut down the recent countercultures. Hippies, for example, Jack Kerouac and William S. Burroughs and the Beat movement might have been an actual rebellion. But one of the first things that came out on YouTube that was really a long, interesting documentary was supposedly narrated and put together by a woman from one of the 300 richest families in the world, but who was a rebel truth teller, was called The Ring of Fire. She claimed that someone in the Rothschilds paid for Osley, this chemist named Osley, to make the acid, to do the acid test to put an end to the war protest movement. And with the addition of shooting 2 college students on Kent State, which made it so that nobody protests war for like 33 years till Columbia and UCSC did. 33 years later, it did I meant to say 53 years later, it did a fucking great job. And then, the punk rock movement seemed really organic rebellion, but the Sex Pistols became the first popular band there, and it was put together by this dude named Malcolm McLaren. I might be getting the name wrong. To control and steer the narrative. I am the Antichrist. Yeah. To steer it toward the devil. So, antinatalism is really encouraging young adults to think it's all bad. Heterosexuality is all bad, in particular, not just reproducing, and it's fucking worked like a charm. I just this channel called Way Out of Line did a quiz. She's a hot, 30 or 40-year-old woman. 50% said we're doomed. 50% said we can save the human race. That's about how fucking successfully they've gotten half the young adults to feel like it's all entirely hopeless. Everything. So, it's not just the scum and the secret societies, but nearly all souls are rampantly seated with the concept that the devil and the ARCHONS are in full control of this, not just in the details on the food labels or your contract, but in full control over everything here, when they're really just extremely masterful genetic tinkerers, interdimensional parasites, killers, and mind control psychology expert thieves who have been taking this realm nearly forever, it seems now. True critical thinking, especially about our personal existence. And they do try to do this to me, and it fucking works on me too on occasion if I'm not careful. True critical thinking about our personal choices is shunned constantly and shunned collectively. Since the ARCHONS certainly have been involved in co-creating the secret ruler society since the Brotherhood of the Snakes in Atlantis, probably. They've successfully vampirized most humans. The Flyers gave us their minds, Castaneda said. They've hybridized our bodies, making us need cholesterol to be healthy. Most who don't tend to animals or practice the non-bestial animal husbandry, or fishermen, are proxy killers because we eat the fish that someone else cut the head off and caught. The lockdowns in Agenda 21, Agenda 2030, the NWO have been masterfully implemented by the Illuminati and the CFR everywhere. They did a fucking excellent job in getting around half of all the spirits and flesh sacks to obey the insane rules and the injections. Why did my housemate over here have to quit mining Ethereum? Couldn't have his business repairing and selling used appliances, which sadly he began right before the lockdown. That, of course, had something to do with it. Why can't he rent out the back apartment? And I feel it's because he hasn't, been able to do that shadow work, but yet, for some reason, is behaving like far less of a cluster B person, going back to his first job, delivering food again. Could it be that the Archon parasites are harassing him less because he's behaving in a way that's less financially sovereign, and that's what they like? Do the Archon voices stop harming us as much if we accept the indentured servitude and more socially lowly positions or obedient positions, less sovereign, obeying their insistence and staying small, being a mild-mannered cog rather than a narcissist ruler? Or did he just get sick of the harm? I don't know the answer. I would love it if he says something to me about it, but I'm not going to bring it up because it's not a good idea when you understand what these things are really about. Is this why so many other talented folks never question the big boys escalating evil? I mean, Van Morrison was the only rock star, an Irish rock star, to question the narrative in 2020, let alone he wrote a whole record about questioning the bullshit. No matter where you look or how you slice it, and even though they are invisible and primarily thieves, you could see this collective nightmare here as very masterfully orchestrated. Even after we leave with the memory wipes, the tunnel of light, the holographic fake Jesus, Buddha, fake parents, or fake whoever you believe in appearing and love bombing you. They really are. The devil, the Archons, we really have to admit and accept they are masters of organization. They masterfully orchestrated, maintained, and grew this collective nightmare. Because Archons, the imposter gods, and false rulers are truly masters of organization, and most on the side of truth and freedom are not. What are we going to do about that?